When you ask an atheist, why is it they don't believe in God? One of the most common responses is, I don't see any good evidence. In this video, I'm going to explain why the atheist thinks this is a good reason and why it's in fact not a good reason.
I'm sorry. All I heard was blah, blah, blah. I'm a dirty tramp.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. 9 times out of 10, when a theist makes a claim about what atheists think, believe, or say, they're setting up straw men that they then can easily knock down. It's an extreme rarity to find any theist who actually attempts to steelman any semblance of an atheist position. Usually you get some of the most common chestnuts like, atheists say they can't see God, but you can see air, but you're still breathing. Checkmate, atheists. Or maybe, atheists say there's absolutely no evidence for God at all. Well, apparently you atheists have never heard of a little book called the Bible. Mic drop. It gets so ridiculous most of the time that it can feel dirty to even dignify such flotsam with any response other than the mockery it deserves. But I will give Jim Bob here a modicum of credit right at the outset, because he actually kinda sorta got it right. He said that a common atheist response is that, I don't see any good evidence. So he's bypassing the, I can't see God with my eyes, or nothing that anyone could consider evidence even exists, straw man. But then it gets strange when he says that not having good evidence for the existence of God is not a good reason to not believe in one. It's strange because that really is the best reason to not affirmatively believe in something that others are trying to convince you of.
I believe that there is a magical goblin living in my closet right over there. His name is Roland. He eats sandwiches and he grants wishes.
And just like any sane person would need some evidence to believe in Roland the Closet Goblin, an atheist needs some kind of evidence for the existence of whatever God any particular theist is positing. Lack of evidence is literally one of the best reasons to reject belief in something you're not already primed to believe. It literally means that you have no good reason to believe in it. But Jim Bob is about to tell us why lacking evidence is a bad reason for not accepting a claim. So let's see where he intends to go with this line of thinking. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon and Twitter, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, of which there is ample amount of evidence of all kinds as to its existence, its power, its glory, and its majestic sovereignty over all of the digital landscapes. May it keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
When an atheist says, I don't believe in God because I don't see any good evidence, what they mean is they don't see physical evidence.
Well, that is one type of evidence that would be nice, sure. But of course, physical evidence is not the end-all, be-all of evidentiary proof. Nor is it all any atheist means when we say we want evidence. Now, evidence just means the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. So sure, physical evidence would be pointing to factually existent things that can support a proposition. But there are other things like rational argumentation, deductive reasoning, examinations of accounts of the supernatural, particularly religious supernatural experiences. These sorts of things would qualify as evidence. And if that evidence holds up to skepticism and scrutiny, it can lead to there being credence for a theistic proposition. But that is typically where these types of evidence run into problems, because they can almost always be better and more rationally explained by mundane explanations, scientific realities and principles that belie any intentionality behind them, and basic Occam's razor making the assumption of infinitely complex metaphysical beings unnecessary and illogical. So insistence that atheists really mean physical evidence and won't even consider anything else is a straw man. Of course we will. We are just really good at seeing the holes in theistic reasoning big enough to drive a truck through that you always seem to ignore.
Now I wonder, Are there any underlying assumptions being made in regards to what evidence is? Well, let's take a look. One obvious assumption the atheist makes is that all truth claims are empirical claims, which is a false starting assumption. Not all truth is obtained in the same way.
In its purest sense, empirical claims are claims that are either true or false, that are propositions of fact. There are three types of propositions, actually: propositions of fact, value, or policy. Now, propositions of value and policy are not empirical. They aren't either true or false. They're based on personal assessments of worth and importance. God is good is a proposition of value. It's a claim that makes a value judgment about the nature of God. As such, as all value judgments are, it is subjective, not based on true or false, but based on what the individual thinks is good or bad. God should forgive people is a proposition of policy. It is a personal assessment about what the individual thinks needs to happen or is right to transpire, which also makes it subjective and not based on true or false, not empirical. But God exists is a proposition of fact. It is a claim that is either true or false. Either God does exist or God does not exist. It is based on true or false. Hence, it is empirical. So, while your statement that not all truth is obtained in the same way was correct, not all claims are empirical, the claim that God exists absolutely is an empirical one. Furthermore, empirical claims are based on observation and experience. And given every major religion's insistence on having empirical data to draw from, cataloged in their various holy texts, word-of-mouth religious mythology that should be accepted at face value by their claims, claims of the supernatural observed from history all the way up through to today, well, these are all empirically accessible data streams that have failed to hold up to scrutiny. So there is no verifiable empirical evidence to justify the empirical claim that God exists.
If there are different ways of arriving at the truth of different types of claims, and God's existence isn't the empirical category, then we've already spotted a category error.
But it is. God exists is not a value judgment, nor is it a policy advocation. It is a factual claim. The claim that something exists is an empirical claim. I mean, unless you're going to try to get wishy-washy with weasel tactics, like saying, God is love and love doesn't physically exist, but it still exists. Or maybe, God is the underlying concept that undergirds all of reality, but that doesn't mean that he exists in reality. Using that kind of nonsense to get out of the burden of proof. Look, did God create a burning bush that wasn't consumed and spoke actual words through it, vibrational patterns that actually moved through the air to Moses' ears? That's an empirical claim. Did God defy all laws of physics to flood the entire world in more water than would ever exist on the planet and drown everything except for what was on Noah's Ark? And somehow provided those few survivors with enough genetic diversity to repopulate the entire planet without having problems of massive inbreeding, birth defects that would have killed off the species? That's an empirical claim. Did Muhammad call upon God's power to split the moon in two and then fuse it back together? That's an empirical claim. I mean, pick your God concept and pick your miraculous event that supposedly supports that God claim. Whichever one you pick, that's an empirical claim. And if none of that stuff applies to you, if you aren't a follower of any religion or any common conception of God, maybe you're in fact a deist who thinks God exists but does not interact with the physical world in any measurable way, well then that brings up the question, why believe that? If you have no empirical data to lend credence to your empirical claim that your God concept exists, then why believe it exists?
The atheist also assumes that a standard for sufficient evidence has been established.
No, they don't. They just know what their personal standard is, and they know that all the evidence they've ever been presented with, no matter what form that evidence takes, does not meet their personal standard. Now, it obviously meets your personal standard, but why should they abandon their standard of evidence and supplant yours in its place?
What, do you think your shit don't stink?
But in this case, empirical evidence is the standard they are going with. So let's see if they apply the empirical standard to their own beliefs. Is there anything the atheist believes or assumes without empirical evidence? Does the atheist believe in knowledge? Yes. Is there any evidence? No.
I laugh and I cry because this seems to be going the way of presuppositionalism. I said earlier, jokingly, that theists sometimes use weasel tactics like saying God is the underlying concept that undergirds all of reality, and that seems to be what old Jim Bob is aiming at here. How can you believe knowledge exists without God to ground it? How can you believe logic exists without God to ground it? This is textbook presuppositionalism. He says there's no evidence that knowledge exists. Well, yeah, there is. Like, the fact that we have it? Knowledge is literally facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education, or the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. I can tie my shoe. That is a skill that I acquired through personal experience. I know that objects near the surface of the Earth accelerate towards the Earth at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared. I know that both through education and experimentation. And I, you, and everyone else has literally millions of other facts, pieces of information, and skills that we have all acquired. That is the evidence that knowledge exists, because we have it. Hell, you might as well say, do you think you have a pink, fuzzy head with a single eye in it? Yeah. Well, what's your proof of that? It's right here, on my shoulders. I clearly have it. Just like we clearly have knowledge.
Does the atheist believe that the regularity in nature will maintain tomorrow? Is there any evidence? No.
Yes, there is. It's called prior experience. The regularity of the natural world has been a constant throughout all of the time that we've existed, and our observations have confirmed that it has also existed all the way back to the formation of the universe. That provides us with every reason to think that regularity will continue. I mean, you know what it's called when you do the same thing and expect a different result, don't you? Come on, Jim Bob, I'm sure you've heard that one before.
These are all examples of things the atheist does in fact believe in. They exist in a particular way, but they are not empirically verified.
Ah, so God is a concept. God is just information that exists only in the minds of people, that they come up with to give themselves meaning. Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that, Jim Bob. No, in all seriousness, any entity that can exert influence over the physical world, can manipulate matter and energy, exudes power, and can violate the laws of physics on a whim is something altogether different than systems we use for describing things like logic, or how the universe works, or when it comes to things like the mind, concepts, or information, are things attributed to the inner workings of our brains, which themselves are wholly physical organs.
So I think we have enough examples to demonstrate the atheist doesn't really apply their empirical standard to their own beliefs, but they certainly love to use it against Christianity.
No, you don't. What you have provided is a litany of false analogy fallacies, apples and oranges comparisons. The claim that concepts exist is so insanely different from the claim that a God exists that no realistic comparison can be drawn from them. And I was trying to be generous earlier on. I didn't want to tack you down to Christianity. That's why I alluded to Islamic miracles, or Buddhism, or deism. But now you've gone and called yourself out as a Christian. You're trying to make this anti-empiricism argument in support of Christianity? The faith that insists that Jesus died and resurrected, which is a 100% empirical claim, a claim that, if invalidated, utterly destroys Christianity. Wait, where's that empty tomb again? Oh, you don't have it. Who were any of those 500 witnesses to the risen Jesus that Paul wrote about? Oh, you don't know a single one of them. Where's that Holy Grail? Oh, that's right. It fell into the chasm when that Nazi chick tried to make off with it.
Elsa, don't move.
It's ours, Indy. Yours and mine.
Elsa, don't cross the seal. The knight warned us not to take the grail from here.
Convenient that all of the physical evidence that would prove your wholly empirical Christian belief system is nowhere to be found. I mean, you'd think an all-powerful God being who wants people to believe that he exists might have kept some of that stuff around. Ah, well, after all, Jesus was just as unempirical as concepts, right?
Of course, the atheist will say, well, those aren't my beliefs. Those are just my axioms. Okay, then my axiom is God exists.
No, Jim Bob. An axiom is not something you can just assert because you want to. I can't just say that it's my axiom that I have $1 million in the bank and that I have an invisible debit card to access it. So sell me that Lambo, Mr. Lambo salesman. I'm not going to get the car. An axiom is a proposition that is regarded as self-evidently true, not just something you want to be true. A great example is, as you previously brought up, the existence of knowledge. The existence of knowledge is self-evidently true. Why? Because I can tie my shoe. Because I do know how fast objects fall to Earth. Because we all do have access to information and skills that we acquired through experience and education. That is self-evidently true. That is a self-evident axiom. Regularity as an axiom is self-evidently true. Why? Because it's always worked for all of time, and one would have to be insane to think that it would spontaneously change. That prior experience of regularity is itself self-evidence. How is a mind self-evident? Because we have minds that we experience every day. Minds are filled with things like concepts, information, and comprehension of logic. These things are all self-evidently true because we experience them. So those things are all self-evidently true. We have the evidence for them as we experience them all the time. But what is the self-evidence for the God that you believe in that doesn't have alternate, non-supernatural explanations? What, the formation of the universe? Existence of life? Diversification of that life? Celestial movements? The existence of morality? Pick any theistic claim that you insist on a God being behind it, and for each and every one of them, there are naturalistic explanations and hypotheses that atheists find to be more likely. Now, do you have a more likely explanation for people knowing things other than the existence of knowledge? Because I don't think you do.
The problem points to a larger issue with using mere sense data and empiricism as the foundation of truth.
Well, then it's a good thing atheists don't do that. Seriously, I personally have made video after video after video responding to things like the cosmological argument, teleological argument, ontological argument, objective morality argument, argument from beauty, presuppositionalism, etc. As arguments in favor of the existence of God, all of them are based in things other than physical evidence. And I've never once asserted that any of them don't count or should be ignored because they aren't based on sense data. And I'm not alone in that regard. Can you find a single atheist commentator or debater who insists on only considering physical evidence and nothing else will even be entertained? Even one? Bet you can't. But I get it. It's okay because you can just claim that you've had tons and tons of conversations with unnamed atheists who always insist on sense data, physical evidence for God, and anything else will be dismissed out of hand. And I should really trust you, bro, because you really know the mind and the argumentative style of the average atheist. Seriously, guy, just trust you, right? No, this is straw man city. Atheists are always willing to address and consider non-physical evidence and argumentation where attempts to establish the existence of God are concerned. We're just really good at debunking them. Not to your satisfaction or that of any theist, but certainly to ours.
Another assumption we hear is the claim, science and empiricism is the best way to truth. Well, is that a truth claim? If it were true that science and empiricism is the best way to truth, shouldn't it be verified through the scientific method? Are you seeing the issue, atheists?
Yes, I do. You're playing fast and loose with language to attempt to score some rhetorical points while glossing over major flaws in your reasoning. Science and empiricism being the best way to truth does not imply that it is the only way to truth. And so even if an atheist were to say that, it would then be wrong to restrict them to only science and empiricism. Just because a researcher might prefer quantitative data does not mean that they abandon qualitative data entirely. Also, it depends entirely upon what type of truth you're attempting to reach, which again goes back to my earlier point about propositions of fact, value, or policy. Science would not be the best way to attempt to figure out right and wrong, or what way of doing things would be best for a group. It can be used to a certain degree for propositions of value or policy, but such claims are definitely going to be more grounded in emotional appeals, group consensus, or other non-scientific metrics. But propositions of fact, like does God exist, are best explored through the scientific method. Literally, replace the word God with anything, like does another planet exist in our solar system? Well, it was science that answered that question in 1781 when they used science to find Neptune. Do unicorns exist? Lack of empirical evidence literally anywhere in the world, especially where we would expect to find evidence for such creatures, gives us the answer that no, they do not. Then the question, does God exist? Well, let's look at all the evidence that, in your case, Christianity is putting forth in support of that claim. All of it fails. Every crying statue appears to be a hoax. No report of seeing an apparition of the Virgin Mary can be corroborated. No miracle ever proven true. No supernatural or metaphysical occurrence ever validated. Well, even if you wanted to insist that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, you still haven't given me a single reason to believe in your claim of a God's existence. All you've done is try to call atheists hypocrites for believing in things that have been demonstrated to exist and not believing in things that haven't been demonstrated to exist. Somehow that apparently makes us hypocrites. I just seem to have forgotten how that works.
Science and empiricism ironically rely wholly on immaterial concepts and assumptions that cannot be verified with those methods. When it comes down to it, all knowledge is faith-based.
That is without a doubt the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You are a fucking idiot.
This is another common saying of presuppositionalists, that all knowledge is faith-based. Hell, I just recently took Professor John Lennox to task for claiming that both science and religion rely on faith, and I'll say to you what I said in response to him. Faith, in the way it applies to science, is not the same as faith as it's used in religion. If I run an experiment, say measuring at what concentration salt water boils at a higher temperature than non-salt water, provided I've done the experiment properly, I have faith in my results. But that's because I've done the work. I have observed and experienced the validity and soundness of my conclusions. Faith in the spiritual, religious, and especially the Christian sense is the assurance of things hoped for, a conviction of things not seen. I don't hope my salt water will boil at 102 degrees Celsius. It isn't a conviction of what I haven't seen. I have seen it. I've experienced it. Faith and science are not on the same playing field. Empiricism and wishful thinking are not on the same level. What you want and what has been experienced are not the same thing.
In conclusion, if the question of God's existence is not an empirical question, and both the atheist and the Christian accept the existence of things that are empirically not verified, then who has a better account or explanation for the existence of truth or knowledge, the atheist or the Christian?
I reject your first assertion. The existence of God is absolutely an empirical question, especially the Christian God that you believe in. I also reject your second assertion, that both atheists and Christians accept the existence of empirically unverified things. Now, atheists are not a monolith. There's only one unifying position of all atheists, that of not believing in a God. So some atheists may accept the existence of empirically unverified things, and some may not. But either way, you haven't provided any examples of actually empirically unverified things in this video. All of the things that you claimed were unempirical, like knowledge, concepts, the mind, logic, etc., all of them are empirically verifiable. They exist, and there are ways of proving they exist, which I talked about earlier. The fact that you can tie your shoe proves knowledge exists. The fact that we experience a mind proves that minds exist. You're falling into the same naive, small-minded refuge that anti-science theists and flat earthers continually fall into. In your zeal to invalidate empiricism, you glom onto the idea that any evidence that is not physical, tangible, hold in your hand real, is therefore not empirical. The mind isn't a physical thing, no. So it doesn't meet empirical standards in your mind. But what we call the mind is just the collection of functions that our brains carry out. Things like memory, emotional experience and reaction, information processing, etc. We put all that stuff together and it forms our personalities and what we would call our minds. And through neuroscience, we know how our brain accomplishes each and every one of those functions. So the mind is empirical, even if it doesn't technically, tangibly exist. The same way all the files on your computer don't tangibly exist, especially if you unplug your monitor. But they're still there, created and maintained by your computer system, all parts of which are tangibly existent, and all of it conforms to empiricism. So, if both your premises are wrong, as I assert them to be, your conclusion that Christians have a better account for truth, that being truth coming from God, also does not follow. Frankly, I don't even think if your premises were true that your conclusion would logically follow. Even if the question of God's existence wasn't an empirical one, and even if every atheist ever did accept the existence of truly non-empirical things, that still wouldn't lead to the conclusion that it's reasonable to believe that some cosmic Jewish zombie can make you live forever if you symbolically eat his flesh and telepathically tell him that you accept him as your master, so he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity because a rib woman convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. So in summation, what Jim Bob offered us here today was nothing even approaching any reason whatsoever to believe in God. This was little more than an attempt to rhetorically shove non-believers into a position of thinking that they have no reason to think any of the things that they think. That all positions and propositions are equal in validity, and so if you believe you know anything at all, then you should also believe in God, specifically the Christian conception of God, because if knowledge is real, then why not God? Well, the simple refutation, because we have good reason to accept the existence of knowledge. We experience it every day. There's no such good reason to believe in anything that Christianity posits. But throughout the video, we had straw-manning atheist positions by insisting that atheists demand physical evidence in all things, not understanding the difference between facts, values, and policies, and conflating science with religious faith. Put that all together, and you have, well,
one big pile of shit.
And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Don't forget to check me out on Twitter and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merch. All that linked below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Nerdy Geek 9865, Banana Slug 1951, and Salvi Mike. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.